Drywall repairman here. Hey, today's job we're going to be fixing a hole in a ceiling. This hole was caused by someone in the attic accidentally stepping through, causing the sheetrock to break right in half. They got lucky though on this one because it just turned into be a 2 by 2 foot section of sheetrock that had to be cut out and replaced. So basic things we always do, we like to put some plastic on the floors. I'm going to run some masking tape in the angles. I necessarily ain't going to have to put plastic on the walls because this is not going to be a spray texture. It's a hand texture called a Santa Fe. It's basically a smooth type texture. Once I get my plastic down, first things first, you want to just get the area squared up. You can use a level, T-square, pencil, whatever you got. You want to get the area nice and square. If you can, like this one, do 2 by 2. Keep it simple. That way you just have to cut out an easy piece of sheetrock and throw it up there. But you want to get everything cut out. I always like to use a razor blade. You can use a keyhole saw. You can use a sawzall, all that other stuff. It makes a lot of dust. Sometimes just doing it the old-fashioned way with a sheetrock razor, just scoring it and snapping it will keep the mess down. I don't like to kick up a lot of dust. I don't want to breathe in dust. So we just try to keep it easy with the razor blade. Cut it out nice and square. This one we're cutting it square on the actual studs, so we're exposing the center of the studs. So I got to pull all my nails, any screws, get all those out of there. Once you get everything all squared up, if you need to, you're going to have to add backing. Always add backing, 1 by 2s, 2 by 4s, 4 by 4s, wood sheeting, whatever you got, you want to add backing if need be. Sometimes you can't go center to center on stud to stud. So in between you can add backing. This just creates a stronger point from the old sheetrock and the new sheetrock to screw into each other. It also, if you have screws on both sides of the sheetrock with backing, it keeps the new patch flush with the existing drywall. Sometimes if you don't put backing in there, you're going to have a big old gap or something like that, or it's going to be not flush with the actual sheetrock patch, and then it causes a mudding nightmare. So putting this backing in just makes everything flush, nice and tight and strong. It prevents any stress cracks, crack outs from your patchwork. Since this is a 1/2 inch, we're just going to use 1 1/4 sheetrock screws, wood screws. These are the perfect screws for the go-to screws for most sheetrock. Most sheetrock in houses is 1/2 inch sheetrock. Sometimes they do 5/8 inside, but majority of the time 5/8 sheetrock is done in garages. 5/8 is a fire rated sheetrock. So if they did use 5/8 interior, they actually went the extra mile to make a strong house. But most of the sheetrock, majority of it's always 1/2 inch sheetrock. So of course when you cut out your area, just double check, make sure you're not hanging 1/2 inch on 5/8. If you did, then you're going to have a very deep patch that's going to take 4, 5, 6 coats of mud to kind of float it out to make it blend in with that heavier sheetrock. Just pretty simple. This video we're just going to do a cutout and everything needed, basically patch up process. Once we get it all sheetrocked, I'm going to go ahead and just mix some 5-minute. I'm using a quick set mud. Of course, if you don't use muds all the time, just use a regular all-purpose joint compound. What I'm going to do with this first coat of mud, I'm going to strike in all the gaps, basically pre-fill. I'm going to pre-fill all these gaps, then I'm going to follow it through with a fiberglass mesh. Fiberglass mesh is the go-to product for all drywall repairs, especially patchwork. I'm basically going to put this tape over the wet pre-filled mud, and then I'm going to push down to get the mud pushed inside there and get the tape to lay nice and flat. I'm going to then follow it through and do a nice thick first coat on it. Since I'm using hot mud, I'm going to leave it a little heavy because we're going to turn around as it's setting up and slick it out with a 6-inch knife. Sometimes if these patches, if you sheetrock it just right, everything's nice and flush, you're able to do a nice coat of this first coat, and then by the time you slick it out each direction, this way, that way, it's almost like a second coat. So you're able to get a nice slick out second coat, and then depending on how it looks, then you might have to follow it through with another tight coat. But if it's nice and flush, everything looks good, then you're ready for texture. On here, I'm doing a Santa Fe texture. It's a basic smooth type texture. It's done in more of the custom houses out here. So it's easier for me to do a Santa Fe versus like a spray knockdown, spray splatter. With spray textures, I have to plastic off everything, plastic off the walls, the vent, and close it all with plastic. Then I have to bring in the hopper, the spray rig, then spray it. So doing these hand textures are always easier. We can get them done quicker, more efficient. That's why I like the newer houses, because they have the skip trowels and the smooth type textures that's done by hand. So it keeps the mess down, keeps the process labor down, so it's easier to do these hand type textures. Basically, I coat everything. I'm just using a 12-inch knife. That's my go-to knife for everything's the 12-inch knife. I know a lot of guys like to carry an 8-inch knife, 10-inch knife, 12-inch knife, 14-inch knife, 18-inch knife. That's fine if you want to go out and buy all these tools, but all you need is a good 6-inch knife and a good coating knife. And a good coating knife is either a 10 or 12-inch. If you're really trying to float out some patches, you need to do a 14-inch, but a 14-inch, you can make more mistakes. So you definitely need to know what you're doing. So it's probably better to just start with a 10-inch knife. Until you can master the 6-inch knife and a 10-inch knife, you shouldn't use any other knives. Just because you buy the tools doesn't mean you couldn't use them. So just basically practice, practice, practice until you get mudding technique down. Then you'll see here on the video, he's going through and he's slicking out everything. Basically, this is a slick out process. Once that hot mud sets up, like this is a 5-minute mud, about 4 to 6 minutes into it, it's going to start setting up. It's not fully dry, it's not fully cured, but it's starting to set up. Once it starts setting up, you can manipulate it. Basically manipulating, we're doing the slick out, going over everything with a wet sponge, damp wet sponge, and then following it through with a 6-inch knife. Basically troweling down everything, pushing down, taking off the extra mud. Basically, you're working the material back and forth, side to side, every direction. You're taking the extra material off, and you're also pushing down on the seams and everything, getting that mud pushed in there. Any imperfections, the mud on your knife, you can actually take it while you're slicking it out and fill in any imperfections. Little lines, bubbles, stuff like that. It's a good slick out process. If done correctly, it's almost like a second skim coat. But this process using hot muds, of course, is more professional grade material. The reason we have to use hot muds is because we have to finish these jobs in one trip. Get them all coated out and textured in one trip. If you don't work with muds every day, I just recommend, like I said, use a regular all-purpose joint compound. Joint compounds you have to let dry overnight, then turn around, sand, then coat, then let it dry, sand, then coat. Regular joint compounds do shrink back, so sometimes you might need an extra coat because they will shrink back in between coats. The hot muds themselves, they don't shrink back. They set up pretty much however you put it on. That's how it's going to be. So that's why you have to slick it out. You can't just put on hot mud and walk away from the job without slicking out. You're going to have to at least slick it out. Even if you're not able to finish the job in one day or one trip, you're still going to have to slick out your coat before you walk away from it. I know on the bags it says easy sanding, but you don't want to sand this stuff. It's a nightmare to sand. It's like trying to sand cement mud, because that's how it sets up. It chemically sets. It's strong like a cement. It's a very strong material. We like to use it in repairs because it sets up quickly, and also it never cracks out. It takes a lot to crack out hot muds. So this is the process of slicking out. It'd be the same with 5-minute, 20-minute, 40-minute, 90-minute. It's pretty much the same process with all hot muds. I know other guys probably out there don't use this technique. They might scrape it after it sets up, scrape out lap marks. But I like to work with the material before it sets up fully. That way you can manipulate the mud while it's still damp and it's still movable. Because once this stuff sets up, that's it. You get what you bought there. After slicking out your first coat, if it's still rough, you would just follow through with a nice tight second coat and you'd go past your work area. Like I said, on this patch, everything was nice and flush because we had backing and tape and pre-filled everything. So it was a nice, good first coat, and then a slick out's basically like a second coat. So we're able to turn around and texture it. On any type of textures, I always like to use a joint compound, a thinned down joint compound, mixed up very good. I don't want clumps in it, goobers, nothing like that. If I have any goobers in it, I'm going to either have to strain my mud or I'm going to have to get new mud. I don't like goobers in my mud. I like it mixed up really creamy, almost like a whipped butter. And the consistency is going to be like a heavy pancake batter. So it just stays on your knife. You're not slopping up, making a big old mess. It's just enough to do a nice thin coat of mud and texture, and then it usually just shrinks back a little bit and it gives you a better, smoother, better finish than using with hot muds. I never texture with hot muds. You know, maybe once in a while I might have to do a job they ask to paint it. If they supply the paint, I might turn around and do hot muds with joint compounds in it. Basically joint compound, then I would mix up a little bit of hot mud, put it in there and kind of mix it around. So make the hot mud and joint compound set up faster, but it's always better just to use a joint compound and let it dry overnight before you do any painting process. With this joint compound, it's going to have to dry overnight, at least 24 hours or so, and then you can turn around and sand it. Sanding is light sanding. It's just to knock the burrs out of it and the grit. Light sanding. You're not grinding away the texture. You're just going over it lightly to knock it down. Either 150 to 220 grit or a fine or medium sanding block, and then always primer drywall. Use a PVA drywall sealer or kills 2 latex before you paint, because that drywall patch is going to absorb a lot of paint. So it's easier to primer it up so the primer seals it up, protects it, and it's ready to go, and then you just paint right over it. A pretty easy video, drywall repairs. Hope you liked it. Please like, comment, subscribe. Thanks for viewing.